Super Smash Bros. Is eternal. It is my multiplayer game now and forever. I remember the exact moment when I first witnessed Super Smash Bros., and from that moment on, I knew it was going to be something I obsessed over. It was a zoomed-in screen of Mario's face in front of the Peach's castle stage in training mode. Weird, I know, but this was the view that greeted me when I walked into Bally's living room in 2001, and from that moment, I was in. I don't know why, but something about the freedom of Smash Bros. Was apparent in that instant. The idea that you could spawn whatever item you wanted, you could play on these crazy stages, and yes, you could even control the camera to zoom wherever you wanted it to go. It is kind of ridiculous, but after that moment, I just wanted to see everything this game had to offer. When we played Melee back in the day, the internet was barely a thing, and so we obsessed over how to unlock every character. I still remember Bally running around the house screaming like a madman when we unlocked Luigi. When Brawl came out, we had marathon sessions with 3 players, and I remember a time when we were staying at my friend's country house up in the north of Scotland, and me having an undefeated streak as Princess Peach, dominating match after match. When the 3DS game was imminent, we bled that demo to death, and continued to play online for weeks and weeks after the game was on Wii U. Then Smash Ultimate, the game that broke through the ceiling for what was possible with guest characters. Smash Bros. Has been a constant in my life for almost 2 decades. It is always the multiplayer game I go to, and over the years we've gone from playing with items to competitive and back again. I can't choose a single Smash Bros. Game. They are all important for different reasons, and I have great memories associated with them all. This series was my real introduction to the wider world of Nintendo and all the history that comes with it. From trophies to event matches to adventure mode, Smash Bros. Is the truest example of a digital Nintendo museum. Sakurai creates characters and movesets with more love and care than most of the characters' original creators. If you were to apply the moniker of video games the video game to a series, it would inevitably be this one. Super Smash Bros. Is eternal. Celeste is a game that shook the foundation of what a platformer could be. I play these types of games for one thing and one thing alone: jumping. But Celeste taught me that a side-scrolling pixel art game could be so much more. It may not be the most subtle with its metaphors, but the mountain climbing struggle, with its persistence and failure, is such a well-considered analogy for mental illness. And the blatantness of its message doesn't feel nearly as ham-fisted as it could have. There are moments, like when you have to calmly move a feather on screen, that relates Madeline's struggle to the player through gameplay, or the many sequences where you're constantly trying to escape your own shadow, your inner voice, without running into it and stopping you. The analogies are persistent yet never overbearing, and through all these small moments you're pulled along by that sense of determination, that desire to see what's in the next room, a curiosity that is built from some of the most incredibly designed platforming challenges I've ever played. I've said it before, but it bears repeating. Celeste is a game about the challenge of beating a puzzle with your mind before conquering it with your body. Another analogy that could aptly apply to Madeline's situation. But this constant back and forth of mental strategy backed up by physical aptitude is what makes Celeste so special. Each of the game's rooms can be beaten in around 30 to 60 seconds if you know what you're doing and if you're able to pull it off. But of course you won't be able to do that first time through. And so by trial and error, you build your skills area after area. The one thing I don't think I touch on enough is how visually diverse Celeste is. Each chapter is themed, not only having a platforming gimmick that distinguishes itself from other areas, but constantly shifting the colour palette to create such divergent spaces to uncover. Despite the basic mechanics being rather simple, these one-off ideas like Oshiro's ghost head or the sparkling space bubbles give the game such a different feel. It means it's always showing you something new. The main story is just so well balanced in terms of difficulty, but if you dig deeper, there is so much more on offer. Each B-side is a devilish challenge that takes true willpower to overcome, and they're also completely new levels that don't simply remix what has come before. It's probably obvious by now, but Celeste feels perfect to play. The tight controls, the aerial movement, the dash and the wall cling are all sublime in their feel and tangibility. Celeste is more than just a great platformer, and is absolutely a game that everyone should experience.
慈悲な言葉だけがでたらめに街に溢れてるNeverも切なく流れてた声
It's hard to capture in words what makes Persona 4 so special. Perhaps it's the rural Japanese setting that is so quaint in its feel and personality. Maybe it's the upbeat yet melancholic soundtrack that punctuates the game's most emotional moments. Or perhaps it's the iconic cast of characters who feel like a friend group you always dreamed of but never had. These reasons and many more start to describe the overwhelmingly positive feelings I have when remembering my time with Persona 4 Golden. It is common for JRPGs to fall into cliches and tropes, and while Persona as a series isn't averse to a certain level of anime, the writing and character work elevates it above most other games in the genre that fall into these traps. These characters are the reason you'll spend so many hours with this game. The excellent voice acting brings Chie, Yukiko, Yosuke and the gang to life in a way no other cast of characters in a JRPG have been. I of course placed Persona 5 lower on this list, and the reason for that, despite the fact that I believe Persona 5 to be the superior game, is the characters. There are so many great moments in Persona 4, from the camping trip with your classmates, to the school outing where you all end up in a bar. Persona 4 lets you live these characters' lives and luxuriate in the downtime, unlike Persona 5, which seems to always cut these moments short. I also love that this game revolves around a central mystery. Someone is kidnapping people and hiding them in the TV realm where you explore dungeons and battle enemies. This murder mystery had me strung along the whole way, with red herrings and all manner of twists. The pull of Persona 4's gameplay loop is probably already familiar to you, but the fact that I loved so many characters in this game made the task of choosing who to spend time with that much harder. And that small town feel is so well realised, with a map that is compact and easy to explore. Visiting these locations will become second nature. There's also of course the combat and dungeon exploration, which is definitely the weaker aspect of the game, but it acts as an incentive for you to finish it all the sooner so you can get back to building your social links and stats. The end of Persona 4 is the closest I've come to crying at a video game. It is an experience that will stay with me forever and deserves to be recognised for that alone. When I first played Fire Emblem, having borrowed it from Philip, our German exchange student, I was enamoured. I remember losing Florina in Chapter 5 and finding out for the first time that if someone died, they were never coming back. A hard lesson, but one I learned early, and is the reason I still play Fire Emblem on Classic mode to this day. This may not have been the first Fire Emblem I owned, but it's the one I still think of as the genesis for my love of the series. It's the game I recommend people start with because of the excellent tutorial with Lynn's initial chapters that fully introduces you to all the core systems of a Fire Emblem game. It boasts absolutely gorgeous pixel art. Look, I know that Fire Emblem games have fully embraced 3D at this point, and that's inevitable, but you will never have a Fire Emblem game that has better animation than the GBA games. The critical hits alone are a masterclass in intricate pixel animation, and they get me hyped every time I see one. The weapons triangle and the magic triangle are simple and easy to understand, and make sense in the way they interlock. The three main lords represent some of the best characters in the series, with Hector being a particular highlight. I love that the game is broken into two halves, with the Lyn and Eliwood arcs being separate yet connected. And it's incredibly cool that this game is actually a prequel story to Fire Emblem 6, a game which only ever came out in Japan. This game was also made back in the day where recruiting characters was in itself a challenge, requiring you to pay attention to the story to see which characters were connected to each other in order to talk to them mid-map and have them join your army. Of course, things like this, as well as the Gaiden chapters, were things I ended up looking up on the internet, but I do appreciate that Fire Emblem used to ask a lot more of you as a player, as opposed to the current iterations where such an idea has been all but jettisoned. Another thing that has been disposed of for the most part are class-specific upgrade items. In this day and age, the Master Seal has become commonplace, but back then if you didn't know your Elysian whip from your hero's crest, you were in trouble. I loved that you had to make choices about which characters you would promote dependent on which upgrade items you had available, and the sparsity of these items would encourage you to comb over every part of a map, visit every house, and open every chest. This game really is the gold standard when it comes to a solid cast of characters, varied locations and maps, and a distilled combat system. Fire Emblem 7 was the first of its kind outside of Japan, but is still, in many ways, the best. Talk about a game that has carved a path to get where it is on my list today. Xenoblade Chronicles stands the test of time because its highs are so incredibly high. Because of this, any flaws I have with it are brushed to the side. I first played this game in late 2011. I had just finished Skyward Sword and needed something else to play on my Wii. Xenoblade was getting a lot of positive buzz from podcasts I was listening to, and it just so happened that it was discounted to £20 around Christmas, something which seems crazy now as the series has gained more than its initial cult following. I was immediately enamored with the scale and scope of the game, but wasn't really clicking with the combat system. This was mainly because I only had a Wii Remote and Nunchuck, which is the worst way to play it. I got to the first spider boss and couldn't beat him, so gave up for a year or so. When I finally picked up a Classic Controller Pro, I came back to the game and got much deeper. Finally, I was able to experience jaw-dropping locations like Machna Forest and Erith Sea. But once again, I hit a boss that I couldn't get past and took another extended break from the game. It was when Chugga Conroy started his Let's Play that I got back in the hot seat, determined to finish it before he did on his channel. And with that motivation, I finally finished Xenoblade Chronicles. And what a ride it was. This game is often maligned for its visuals and how the faces are bad, but I couldn't disagree more. Sure, Xenoblade is a game of its platform and time, but it is amongst the best looking games ever made. From the first moment you walk out onto Bionis' knee, to the view atop one of the extended digits at the fallen arm, the game is a non-stop wonder. It helps that the location of this story is unlike any other. The Bionis and Mechonis, once living beings, house their inhabitants on their bodies. This means that you often can see other locations you'll eventually visit from where you currently are. It's not quite a Skyrim or Breath of the Wild, but if you can see it, more than likely you will go there. But I haven't even talked about the core of what makes this game so memorable to me. This might be my favourite story in a video game. The main thrust of the narrative is so full of secrets and mysteries that are excellently teased and then paid off in a remarkable way. The characters of course have a lot to do with this. They are such a lovable group, and each party member gets their own moment in the spotlight throughout the 70+ hour journey. There are moments of tension and emotion like no other RPG I've played. Mainly because the cutscenes are scored by what in my opinion is the greatest video game soundtrack of all time. There are songs in this game that I can't hear without also hearing dialogue alongside them. The two are so perfectly intertwined that it's hard to have one without the other. I'm thrilled this game is getting remade for Nintendo Switch, as despite the larger success of its sequel, this is the superior game and deserves to be played by so many more people. This is not a game I ever would have expected to be this high up a list of my top 100, but here we are. When Overwatch first came out, it pretty much flew completely off my radar. I remember watching Giant Bomb stream some of the game, and while doing so felt a little motion sick at the first person movement. I thought that was it for me in this game. Over the next year, Overwatch gained a lot of momentum, winning Game of the Year for the Game Awards, and through cultural osmosis and social media, I pretty much knew all the characters' names. But it wasn't until the game's anniversary in 2017, when they were having a free weekend, that I jumped in to try it out. And I swear with all my heart that within 40 minutes of playing, I instantly knew it was going to be one of my favourite games ever. It was the bright colors of the environments, the spectacular visual design that clearly designated enemy players and health bars, the fact that each character was built with so much personality in even their small first-person animations, but most importantly, every character was completely different. It was a multiplayer game that changed every time you chose a new character because learning how they moved, their weapon, where and how to use them felt like a unique joy every time. As someone who has never been great at first-person shooters, I started playing as Mercy to ease myself in, and realized that healing had never been more fun. The thrill of keeping teammates alive while also trying to keep myself hidden and safe was unlike any character I played in the game before. Then there was Tracer with her precision guns and speed-based gameplay, who was incredibly tough to play as, but slowly helped me improve my aim and accuracy. As I slowly spent more and more time with each character, leveling up and getting some of the most beautifully designed character skins as I progressed, I knew this was a hole I was going to fall deep into. And I certainly did. If you follow me, you know that I'm not someone who's really on board with the current trend of games as a service. I really don't care for things like Destiny or The Division, but if there is one game that I will always come back to, it is undoubtedly Overwatch. I remember getting my first play of the game and topping the team for a number of eliminations. Each time I picked up a character, I would keep playing for them as long as possible to really learn their strengths. This game is of course endless because it's multiplayer, but there is also seemingly endless depth, with new characters and maps being added over time. The core mechanics and feel of Overwatch is so damn incredible that I don't know if a game like this will ever be done this perfectly again. It was a sad day when my first PC graphics card died, but in many ways it was one of the most opportune moments in my gaming life. I of course needed to replace my defunct GTX 660, and it just so happened that if you bought a GTX 970 back in the middle of 2015, you got a free copy of The Witcher 3 to go alongside it. I'd heard a bunch about The Witcher in previous E3s and owned the second game on Steam, so it seemed like something I should try. Little did I know that I would binge my way through Witcher 2 in 3 days, but I would then proceed to spend more time with The Witcher 3 than any other single-player game in my life. This game was a revelation. Its fantasy setting, lush with gorgeous forests and vast landscapes, was backed by a soundtrack that elevated every tiny element. The moment you arrive in Skellige and hear the haunting vocal track that accompanies your travels is a moment I won't soon forget. So much of my experience with this game is enhanced by the fact that it was the most impressive looking video game I'd ever seen, and it was an open world. Usually I tend to bomb my way through these types of games, not thinking the collectibles are worth pursuing and being more invested in the main story. And don't get me wrong, I was certainly very invested in the narrative through line of The Witcher 3, but everything else you can do in this game is so damn good that I would constantly get sidetracked. Each questline is superbly written, with dialogue and tone that befits this grim fairy tale world. Having just read the short story collection that begins the series of books these games are based on, I now have a newfound appreciation for how CD Projekt Red were able to capture Geralt's world. Each side quest feels like a short story in its own right, and there are an abundance of them, each so varied and nuanced that you don't even view them as side quests, but instead rich parts of the world that Geralt just so happens to stumble upon. I also really like the combat in this game. There is a slow, methodical pace to it, and each of Geralt's magical signs are enough to spice up the action. Yes, I did rely on the shielding Quen for a lot of the game, but fighting certain enemies definitely requires strategies to take them down. But most of all, I love this world and these characters. Geralt, Yennefer, Triss, Ciri, Dandelion, and so many more make this journey so incredibly memorable. It isn't often that I say 70 hours is the right length for a video game, but for Witcher 3 it absolutely is. Each arc is so well built out, and the consequences of your choices are so well earned. It's a remarkable achievement in video games, and an adventure that will stick with me for many moons to come. It feels like Ori and the Blind Forest was specifically made for me. A Metroid-style game where the progression is fairly linear but allows you to sweep the map for collectibles with freedom? Check. A platformer with precision controls, quick deaths and instant respawns that provides challenges which are both fun to execute but also give you worthwhile rewards? Check. A sweeping orchestral soundtrack that heightens emotions and is laced with leitmotif that I can listen to and enjoy even outside the game? Check. A gorgeous hand-drawn art style that conveys environmental detail, interactable platforms, and important collectibles with subtlety and nuance? Check. There is no universe in which I wouldn't love a game with all these elements. But there is one in which they weren't all perfectly executed together. Thankfully, that isn't a universe we live in, because Ori and the Blind Forest is not only incredible as a result of the sum of its parts, but because it exceeds them by creating a symphony of these elements as one cohesive whole. This is a game that is melancholy in its tone. It starts off incredibly sad, but still manages to keep a thread of hope alive throughout the whole journey. The storytelling can at sometimes be overt, but by the end you understand the motivation of even the main villain in a way that makes you empathize with their situation. The controls are sublime, allowing you to reach a flow state with the movement that rivals any traversal system in video games. This is mainly due to one of the best multi-purpose abilities I've ever used in Bash, which allows Ori to rebound off objects, giving him an extra jump in the air. This move can be used to launch yourself off of enemies themselves, projectiles they shoot out, and falling parts of the environment like rocks. However, this ability can also be used to shoot enemy projectiles back at them, as whatever direction Ori launches himself in, the projectile will fly in the opposite. This layered design is what makes the gameplay so fluid, and once you reach the end of the game with a triple jump, bash, and an air dash, you can practically fly through areas. This is the screw attack / space jump in full effect, only far more graceful. I often hear people complain that the combat is too simplistic and call it out as a reason the game isn't as good as it could be, but I vehemently disagree. Yes, it is a Metroidvania, but platforming comes first and foremost in its design. The game is built around the ability to attack enemies while clinging to walls, or even while wall jumping. The auto-targeting is a perfect solution when combat could become endlessly frustrating otherwise. It allows you to focus on dodging projectiles and platforming without the need to also aim at a target. It is a streamlining that belies the entire design ethos of the game. The crown jewel at the center of this game, however, are its answer to boss fights in the escape sequences. Gorgeous platforming gauntlets that build on all of your skills and are just an audio-visual delight. Ori and the Blind Forest is truly a wonderful experience and easily one of my favorite games ever made. Let's rewind back to 2003. Nintendo was struggling mightily with their latest home console, the GameCube, and were being mostly carried by the soaring success of the Game Boy Advance. At the time, I was in primary school and an avid Nintendo fan, but I didn't really have much knowledge about the company outside of Pokemon and Smash Brothers. So, when I saw one of my friends playing Metroid Fusion for the first time during downtime in our school play rehearsals, for whatever reason, it spoke to me. It was a beautiful pixel art game that used every color known to man. It seemed like this mix between a platformer and an action game, and I knew I had to have it. Fast forward a few weeks, and both of us are playing the game during play rehearsals, after I convinced my parents, of course, to get it for me. But the thing is, I was really bad at Metroid Fusion. My friend had to help me beat the first boss as I was incapable of doing so myself. I think it helped that the game was quite linear because at that age I think I would have gotten completely lost otherwise. This is a game that I have memories of for a large portion of my younger life. It probably took me around 5 years to finish it, as I evolved my skills from childhood into my teens. The same Philip who introduced me to Fire Emblem also helped me beat the spider boss that I'd been stuck on forever. I associate my holidays to Dubai and Kenya one year with the underwater maze section of the game, and I fondly recall sitting in the back of a car as we drove to my grandparents' house, finally beating the game once and for all. But it didn't end there, because Metroid Fusion was one of the first games I really felt compelled to 100%. It is riddled with secrets that are locked behind pretty rigorous platforming challenges that force you to learn how to shine spark. But why is this the case? Why is Metroid Fusion such a perfect video game for me? Well, for one, as I mentioned before, it is that blend of exploration and action. Each sector is self-contained, but provides enough opportunities to find secrets as you explore, while also having a focus. The game is downright gorgeous, and despite the low resolution, still holds up today in terms of pixel art. The way Samus's X-suit moves almost organically around her is conveyed in such a subtle way. It has some of my favourite sound design ever, with the click of locking in your missiles and the clunk of grabbing onto a ledge being particular standouts. Speaking of missiles, this game's upgrade structure is so streamlined. One of my biggest complaints about Super Metroid is the constant switching between missile types. Fusion just layers upgrades on top of each other, so you're never fiddling with the select button mid-combat. The bosses are tremendous and challenging, each one providing a unique scenario that makes them so memorable. The speeding snake Ceres and the time-bending Nightmare couldn't be more different, but both are stellar. Fundamentally, this game just feels right in every sense. It is a game I can pick up at any time and play through from start to finish without any qualms. Many games hold up in your mind because of nostalgia, but for me, Metroid Fusion is as good as any modern game, and a damn sight better than most. What does one really say about Breath of the Wild at this point? It is a game that blew me away when I first played it, and I wondered if I'd feel the same 10 years on. And despite the fact that it has only been 2.5 years since it released, I can quite confidently say that Breath of the Wild is a game that will not only stand the test of time, but will be looked back on as one of the most important landmarks in the history of the medium. This is a hard thing to articulate, but I heard Bill Trinen talk about the game before we knew that much about it, and he described riding across open plains for hours and hours and getting lost in the vastness of the world. Needless to say, I didn't believe him, not in the way I imagined what that statement meant. Sure, video games are big these days, some are enormous, but that sense of unbridled freedom and exploration? Nah, no chance that was going to be the case. And yet, it was. I still don't understand how Nintendo achieved it, but they made an apocalyptic world that felt anything but. The rolling hills and grassy plains, the hard-ridged mountains and flowing streams, each one punctuated by an interesting and unique piece of environmental design, and from almost every direction, a view of the central castle that signaled your place in the world. This wasn't just a video game world. This was a place, one that was meant to be explored and discovered, one where the secrets you discovered weren't just limited to little environmental puzzles, but were littered throughout all aspects of the game's design. Learning that you could use an electric arrow on a puddle and it would cause a huge spark to encompass an enemy, or discovering that if you killed a chew with a fire rod that they would drop red chew jelly instead of the regular blue. Or my favourite moment of self-discovery, when encountering a shrine frozen in ice and realising I had no way to melt it. But I thought that if I crouched close enough with a fire rod on my back, it would very slowly melt away. I may have sat there for 20 minutes, but it was my 20 minutes, dictated by a choice that I had made, and the game didn't push back. It said yes, this is possible, and that really is the defining aspect of Breath of the Wild. It says yes at every opportunity, and allows a freedom of expression heretofore unseen in a video game of this scope and scale. I remember the first secret I found, and I think its simplicity defines the pure beauty of Breath of the Wild. I happened upon a small cave mound with an entrance, and inside was a group of 5 flowers. As I moved through them in order, they lit up and eventually rewarded me with a Korok seed. This puzzle is simple and innocuous. There is nothing challenging about it, and sure, Korok seeds are everywhere. but I wonder how many other people stumbled upon that area. For how many people was it their first secret? That memory and moment of discovery is mine and mine alone. It is a mark of my adventure and journey. And there really is no other video game that I can say the same about. So often video game marketing tells us that this is your journey and you can make all the choices. But rarely do they ever live up to that promise. Breath of the Wild is the only game I have where my memories of it feel like real lived memories. It is a game that goes beyond the medium. It is undoubtedly the most I have been awed by a game, and a remarkable achievement. It is the greatest video game ever made, and also my number one. Oh, the number of times I've heard this music loop, I cannot tell you. Look, I couldn't make a top 100 games list and not talk about Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. They are the reason I'm making this video. They are the games that introduced me to the internet and online communities, and through them I made so many friends and have stayed connected with so many people. If I'm honest, I don't really remember that much of the single-player adventure in Diamond and Pearl. That's not what the game is about for me. It was a whole world of discovering the competitive side to this thing I'd loved since being a child, and the realization that Pokemon wasn't just a kid's game, but this complex, tactical thing that hewed more towards chess than anything else. From my first Dragon Dance Focus Sash Salamence to Shuckle and my Sandstorm team, I have endless positive memories of this game, and so many of them still exist on the internet for you to go and see for yourself. This is where I learned the metagame, and to my mind is still the most fun and balanced Pokemon has ever been. There are a million different things I can mention, but I just want to close this list out by saying thank you. Thank you for watching my videos or for listening to my podcast for all this time. I know there aren't as many people still following what I do as there used to be, but I appreciate everyone who has stuck around. This has been by far the biggest project I've ever worked on, and I'm so pleased to have completed it. With that said, thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.